Is Charles Oliveira living in denial? Because we are 2 days out from him fighting Beneil Dariush, and he's been making some alarming statements in the media in regards to his last fight against Islam Makhachev. He has basically came out and told us that he hasn't even watched the fight and that wasn't even him in the cage, and you're guaranteed to see a new version of me. I don't really need to change much. I just wasn't that hungry, which is just a cause for concern for anyone that actually wants this man to get his hand raised against Beneil Dariush this Saturday. But anyway, let me just show you exactly what I'm talking about.
When you talk last fight and say, that wasn't you, you weren't there, have you ever had that feeling before in your career?
Nunca na minha vida. Todas as vezes eu lutei, independente de perder ou vencer, eu lutei. A pergunta fica para todos, qualquer de vocês, quem é meu fã de verdade?
Never in my life. Never. I've never had that feeling. For all of you, there are real fans of mine that admire what I do. Did you see 10% of me there at all?
Can't say that I did.
A gente não entende os propósitos, as coisas que tem que acontecer. Simplesmente eu não estava lá.
That's it. I wasn't there. Sometimes you have no way of explaining. You don't understand why things are happening. There's a purpose for things not happening or happening, but I wasn't there, man.
So Charles basically gets asked, what went wrong? And he says, there's no explanation. I just wasn't there that night. That wasn't me. If you're a Charles Oliveira fan, you know that wasn't even 10% of me. It's just God didn't have it in the cards for me to do well. Well, if you actually watch the fight, then you can explain what went wrong, and that is his defense. Sometimes Charles Oliveira's striking defense is piss poor, and that's not like a wild statement because it's just a fucking fact. This guy gets hit and teed off on in every single one of his fights. He doesn't move his head that much, and he really struggles with dealing with hooks. And these are the same weapons that are dropping him time and time again. And what do you know? Islam Makhachev dropped Charles, just like Gaethje did, just like Poirier did. But those guys lost to him. The reason why Islam didn't is because he could actually capitalize on the moment because he's an elite grappler. Well, guess who else is an elite grappler? Beneil Dariush. And if Beneil Dariush catches Charles, he's jumping all over him. And he's probably going to keep him down or at least have some success. And it's like, there is an explanation. To sit here and say, I don't know, it just wasn't in the cards. God didn't want me to get my hand raised on that day. I understand that Charles is a very dramatic person. But this is a delusional mindset. This is not a good mindset for making improvements and actually getting better because he's not willing to look back at his mistakes. He's not willing to pick apart his game.
So what is the new Charles like? Because I know you said you didn't really look too much into the Islam Makhachev fight. You kind of pushed it to the side because you didn't feel it was a good performance. So what have you done differently leading into this fight?
A luta do Islam eu nem vi, não estava lá, não era eu. O novo Charles. O Charles que há algum tempo atrás, esse é o novo Charles.
I didn't watch it. It wasn't me. I wasn't there. This is a different Charles. This is a Charles that's thirsty. The Charles that you're going to see is the Charles that you know that's thirsty for victory, that's hungry, someone who's back at it, and a lion that's always hunting. That's the Charles that you're going to see.
So Charles Oliveira just told us that I haven't even watched the fight, that wasn't me that night, and I'm actually hungry this time. Well, the first thing I have to say is, how were you not hungry for the Islam Makhachev fight? This was the biggest fight of his entire career. This was Khabib's protege. This was supposed to be you versus Khabib. That was the fantasy matchup that we were missing, and that was our opportunity, and you couldn't get up for that? I'm not buying it at all. What I think is actually the case is that Charles Oliveira just doesn't want to watch it back because he's in denial. Simple as. And that is a horrible sign for anyone that is actually going to pick this guy to win, because how are you going to learn from your mistakes when you can't even identify them? You have to be aware of your weaknesses. That was Charles Oliveira that showed up against Islam Makhachev. That was just as good of a Charles Oliveira that we've seen against Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje. The only difference was he was actually able to capitalize off of dropping Charles. Charles has always had the same weaknesses in his game, and it's been exploited by his past 3 fucking opponents. That's the fact that he doesn't defend his chin very well, and they catch him with the same weapon, which is a hook. Charles cannot defend hooks very well, especially a lead hook from a southpaw fighter. Again, there could just be something lost in translation. Maybe Charles just doesn't want to discuss it. Maybe he actually has watched it, but I find it really hard to believe that this guy is going to really drastically improve and show a difference when he fights Beneil Dariush if he genuinely hasn't watched the fight or hasn't learned from it? How the fuck are you supposed to learn from your mistakes? This is crazy. Like, how are you going to be confident in picking this man to beat Beneil Dariush, who is a similar stylistic matchup to Islam Makhachev? And if you're not, humble enough to watch your fights back or to see where you have mistakes, to see where you have holes in your game, then eventually the game's going to pass you up. And if one guy exposes you that's well-rounded, that can grapple and that can strike, well, they're all going to expose you. As I said, his coaches might be all over it. They might be breaking down his fights. They might be implementing what they see in the footage, all of his flaws, all of his strengths, and trying to tailor his training in a way that is going to help him improve. But I have a hard time believing that that's enough. You need the athlete himself to understand where he went wrong. And maybe he's just tuning that out of his mind during fight week. But I feel like acceptance is the first step towards actually improving. You have to accept where you're not necessarily bulletproof solid. You know what I mean? Another thing that I want to mention is we know Charles Oliveira's issue in the beginning of his career is that he had a lot of the skills, but he just used to break. He used to wilt. People would call him a quitter. And he was aware of this. The way that he was able to overcome this was by making a complete mental switch and being the toughest guy on earth. Like just marching people down with relentless pressure and breaking them with mental fortitude and iron resolve. And Charles went from one extreme to the other. And I feel like that's the way that he was coping with these losses. So this guy that asks him, well, have we ever seen that before? You said that you weren't there that night. What about all these other losses? Were you not there on those nights either? And the truth is, man, that may have been true back in the day. Maybe it was a mental issue for him back in the day, but it ain't anymore. Charles has fixed that hole in his game. The reason why he's getting beat by an Islam Makhachev is a technical issue. It has nothing to do with his mental battle. And I feel like that complete switch to the other extreme for Charles Oliveira could be a double-edged sword. It could have diminishing returns because he's had so much success. He's had this championship run and defended that belt multiple times. He might be of the belief that all he needs, of course he has the skill, but all he needs to continue to win is just remain super solid and tough. But at a certain point, you're going to face other guys that are also really tough and extremely well-rounded and just hard stylistic matchups. And you have to be able to nitpick your game and to nitpick their game and to break it down to the very finest detail to see how you can win. Because Charles is at the pinnacle when it comes to his skill, except for the defensive part of his game. And that's the thing that he needs to nitpick. And if he's just of this mindset that it's all about toughness and grit, then you're not going to learn. You know what I mean? And you're not going to actually improve. You're just going to hit a wall. And that's where I feel like Charles is right now. He's kind of hit this wall when it comes to facing guys like Islam, when it comes to facing guys like Beneil. And you need to nitpick everything in order to beat these guys. When I hear Beneil Dariush talk, guys, he is so fucking aware of where Charles Oliveira is dangerous, where Charles Oliveira needs the utmost respect, where he needs to be cautious. He's even said that if the best Charles comes out, a defensively minded Charles that fights at range, that is still pretty offensive, I'm in for a tough fight. I'm not just going to go here and finish this guy. I'm in for a war, and I'm fully prepared for that. When I hear Charles talk, it's just like I'm bringing back the lion mentality. I'm actually thirsty this time. I wasn't really there in Abu Dhabi. No, I wasn't hungry at all. Even though it was the biggest fight of my entire career, even though it was arguably the most formidable opponent that I've ever stood in front, I wasn't hungry. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think Charles lost to Islam because he wasn't hungry. You know what I mean? I don't think any of us would sit here and say that. This is a guy that lost because he made errors. Technical errors that are very evident to the naked eye when you just watch the fights back. He gets hit and he can fix that. He can have better head movement. He can defend his chin a little bit better. He can try to counter strikers like Islam Makhachev rather than just go first and throw naked strikes. But if you're not watching the fights, you're not going to pick this up. So I want to know what you guys think about this. Especially for those of you that are picking Charles. Are you guys concerned with these statements? And for the people that are picking Beneil, do you feel more confident? Because I certainly do. I am picking Beneil Dariush. And it has nothing to do with the toughness. It has nothing to do with Charles Oliveira not having a chance. He can finish anyone. The most finishes in UFC history. I just don't think it's that likely that this mentality is conducive to fixing gaps in your game that other people can exploit, especially a guy like Beneil Dariush, an elite grappler who is a southpaw. You know, we've seen southpaws have success against Charles Oliveira. We've seen Dustin drop him and hurt him twice. We've seen Islam drop him and submit him like that. I want to know what you guys think. I'm excited for the press conference. I'm looking forward to see if Charles Oliveira shows something a little bit different. I don't think we're going to get a lot of trash talk in the press conference, to be honest, but it should be interesting nonetheless, and I can't wait for the stare down. Charles Oliveira has a extremely intense stare down every time. Until next time.